and it's primarily that work ethic that military personnel bring to the job. And that's what a lot of organizations in the private sector are lacking.
You're listening to the 7 Echo Podcast, brought to you by 7 Eagle Group, the place where we highlight inspiring and interesting United States military veterans who have found a successful civilian career after trading in their uniforms.
Hey everybody, it's Rich from 7 Echo Podcast. Today I'm joined by Sergeant Major retired Bill Moisant. He served in the United States Army as a military police soldier for 30 years and continued serving afterwards as a DA civilian and working in government in other capacities as well. So he has a lot of experience and a lot of things to speak about. Additionally, he was the TRADOC Provost Sergeant Major, which is also pretty huge. So, Bill, welcome to the podcast. I'm happy to have you here, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on your show.
So the first thing we'll get into was, what was your transition out of the military like? I mean, you were a sergeant major, so it's not, I think it's a little unique how your transition might have been. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, fortunately for me and a bunch of my peers during that period of time when I retired, I actually retired in January 2003, but was on terminal leave for a couple of months. So really toward the end of 2002 when I transitioned. And there was a lot of positions popping up around the country because of the events of 9/11, and so I went straight into government service with the Transportation Security Administration. It was a pretty smooth transition, quite honestly. I think that the hiring official with TSA, who was a retired FBI agent, he recognized the value that military and law enforcement brought to his organization. So almost everybody that was in the hiring authority for him were former military or former law enforcement. So it was a pretty smooth transition, but it was really part of the time. It was the right time at the right place. Unfortunately, it was just one of those results of the tragic events of 9/11. Those positions became available.
Absolutely. Yes. So do you think that you were set up for success? Did the Army provide you the tools through SFL and TAP that, to have that healthy transition? How do you feel about that?
Well, during the period of time that I retired, the transition programs that are now pretty robust in the military, they existed, but they weren't quite as robust and weren't even mandatory. So, I think when I retired, I had like a 4-hour transition briefing I had to attend, but I didn't take the opportunity to do more, partly because I had this job opportunity presented to me and I didn't really need to. But so transition-wise, I probably didn't benefit from what the military has to offer, but certainly, the work ethic and the communication skills and that sort of dedication to the mission that I learned in the military is what got me that job, quite honestly. Because the hiring official wanted people that he could trust, and he recognized that he could trust military personnel.
Absolutely. So, well, what do you think was or what would you say is the most difficult thing about your transition? So obviously you went straight into another job, and that was great. You were able to leverage your skills, but what was tough for you?
Quite honestly, going from a structure that I had grown used to, lived up, grown up with, into an environment where it was less structured, and then the camaraderie. Having been in the military, that camaraderie is part of military life. Your brothers and sisters at arms, In civilian life, even as a civilian for the Army later on, you still didn't have the same camaraderie. People kind of did their 9 to 5 job and went home because they had families, to take care of. And we didn't quite take the time to get to know each other really well. Of course, some of us did, but not everybody. Because not that first job with TSA, we had a couple hundred people in that workforce, and only about a quarter of them, a third of them maybe, were veterans. So not everyone brought that same work ethic with them to the job.
Right.
That was a little difficult.
I think, it's something that comes up as a common thread between speaking to veterans about difficulties of transition. It's the relationships in the civilian workplace are a lot more transactional. You see Joe when you go to work every day, and then, you can be friendly when you're there, but then, you go home to your family at the end of the day. Well, you're never going to be on the side of a mountain with Joe, worrying about if you're not going to come home, at the end of your work day. So I think, you hit it on, a lot of other people hit on it too, is just that camaraderie and those sacrifices you make and endure with one another, truly bond somebody together. And you may have only known that person for a few weeks in the military, but it's like you've known them for a few months.
Right. It's that shared experience, whether or not you're new to a unit or your fellow soldier is new to your unit, you have a shared experience that you went through. And in the civilian world, not everyone has that shared experience that they can, bond over.
Absolutely. So after your time at the TSA, you went into work in anti-terrorism role within the Army as a DA civilian. Could you speak on that and maybe how you leveraged your skills learned in the military to better perform in that role?
Yeah. Well, having served nearly 30 years as an NP soldier, a lot of that security and anti-terrorism work was sort of in keeping with what I did during that period of time. So the transition from the military into the security realm was a pretty easy fit for me. But honestly, before I talk to how that transition to anti-terrorism worked, I'll tell you that's not what I really kind of anticipated doing when I was preparing for retirement. Before I had this job officer at TSA, I seriously considered becoming a teacher. I thought I had prepared myself to teach, at the elementary or middle school, high school levels. But when it came time to transition, once again, because of the tragic events of 9/11, there was far more security jobs available than there were teaching jobs. So it was kind of what I was drawn to. But
right.
Once again, it was a pretty easy fit for me going from military police operations to security operations. And I was really grateful having spent that 1 year with TSA working at an airport, and then getting the opportunity to go back and work for the Army as a civilian, as that anti-terrorism officer at Fort Monroe, Virginia. It was a great opportunity for me for more than one reason, but I felt like I was going home, having spent all that time in the Army and then now working as an Army civilian. It made me a lot more comfortable. The job wasn't all that significantly different than working for TSA. There were differences, of course, but not in the big picture. It wasn't all that great. But right. I just felt like I was going home to the Army. So some of that camaraderie I spoke of that was lacking, was a little bit better then.
Yeah, I think it's in the walls, when you go there. So absolutely. But, you touched on thinking that you wanted to go into the education realm. And I think there's such a parallel there that not everybody recognizes, that it's so instilled in you as a leader in the military from team leader on up, that you are instructing, teaching, mentoring, developing soldiers that you're in charge of. And, so for many who leave as a senior leader or even mid-level, teaching is a natural fit. as long as you have the right personality, but you've certainly have the experience if you've made it to that point.
Yeah, that's true. I think, NCOs and officers, but specifically NCOs, they train and mentor soldiers. That's their job on a daily basis. But it is a little bit different, training and mentoring adults,
Right.
and trying to teach younger students. Yeah, but I think a lot of soldiers would be great teachers. They're certainly tremendous role models. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think something I eventually wanted to get to today was kind of how, your advice for non-commissioned officers who get out, because I think a lot of time, I was an officer, so that's, of course I developed my squad leaders and tried to help them as best I could, my team leaders as well. But, you were the NCO. So I think sometimes NCOs tend to limit themselves when they get out and they don't see themselves as that type. But I think that's wrong to look at it that way, and that's a bad stigma. And what would you say to that?
well, I think you're spot on. I think a lot of times, enlisted soldiers in particular, they sell themselves short, and they don't really understand their value. But I'll tell you that, not only working as a civilian in the government, but having interacted with leaders in private industry as well. The industries, they recognize the value of military personnel, and it's primarily that work ethic that military personnel bring to the job. And that's what a lot of organizations in the private sector are lacking. Any advice that I would give for, transitioning non-commissioned officers or enlisted personnel would be just that. Don't sell yourself short. And before you get out, plan ahead. Don't wait till that day you get your discharge paperwork or your retirement orders to think about what's next. Try to plan ahead while you're on active duty, time allowing. Utilize the opportunities and the benefits that are available to you with tuition assistance to try to enhance your education. And now I say that realizing that in today's military, or at least for the better part of the last 19 years, the personnel tempo and the operation tempo of our personnel and our units have been extremely high. And it's easy to sit behind a computer and say, to try to take advantage of those benefits while you're on active duty. Right. And you just may not have the opportunity. When you come back from a deployment, the first thing you probably want to do is decompress, spend time with your family, and not crack a book.
Absolutely.
I say that realizing that not everyone can do that, but don't sell yourself short, because the work ethic and the technical skills that you learned in the military will transition to civilian employment. And then I'd say, make sure you use your benefits. If you need to further your education, utilize those VA benefits, educational benefits. Whether or not you are transitioning into a job that has medical benefits, you're entitled to VA benefits. So if you're near a VA hospital or clinic, consider that for your transition medical services, if not your full-time medical services.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then take advantage of those transition programs that are now quite robust and a little more mandatory than when I transitioned. But the militaries, all the services have invested significantly into those transition programs, and there's a lot of prep work that they'll help you do, and a lot of job seeking that they can help you do as well. resumes and job applications and different contexts that you can make.
Definitely. So I think, like you mentioned, the op tempo at, especially within like Force Com, and these, I was in the 101st, and, we had back-to-back deployments where, 7 or 8 of the 12 months you were home between deployments was a training cycle. And it's like, and then so you look at things like this and you're like, well, I'll do that then. And then when then comes and you have 3 months till you ETS, now it's like, well, it's looked at as mandatory training like everything else in the military. So you're automatically turned off to it. It's not very attractive, but it's extremely important. And I think where it comes in is probably company level and below leaders. Your company commander, first sergeant, platoon leaders, platoon sergeants, really putting that out there. And the Army is a people business. The military is a people business. And empowering our people is extremely important. And part of that is setting them up for success after. So you have to invest a little time in them. So when they leave the military, maybe they continue to serve as a DA civilian or otherwise, contribute to the nation's mission to secure America and contribute as a government employee. But and also just to not leave with a salty taste in their mouth, like many service members do.
Well, like we've talked about, the services have invested significantly in transition programs. There are now service level policies that allow appropriated funds to be utilized for some of that transition work. The Army in particular has gone to great lengths in the last several years to have the skills that service member soldiers receive during or learn during their military service transition to civilian life. A lot of credentialing and
right.
Getting your over the road licenses, your truck licenses and whatnot is pretty common. A lot of certifications for our culinary personnel. Our cooks get culinary certifications. So there's a lot of credentialing and stuff that can be had just because of your military skills that you've learned.
Right.
And that would be another bit of advice I would give every transitioning soldier is look into any professional certifications that you've already qualified for based on your military experience and get those certifications, because a lot of jobs in the private sector don't always require education, but many of them require certification. So if you're a certified mechanic or certified truck driver or certified cook, or in my case from military police field, certified security professional.
Absolutely.
Education and professional certifications are both very valuable.
Right. And so speaking about credentialing specifically, there's a program called COOL, COOL. And so service members could look into that, where they actually, like you mentioned, have appropriated funds to help pursue a certification. There's also where, you have, I think I forget what the program's called, but you have a year or so left in service. You can actually go work learn how to be a plumber as an apprentice, et cetera. So, it's just tough to get those signed off sometimes depending on your unit. But at any rate, the importance is to do those things before. And there's many other things you can do too, like, set up a LinkedIn profile, start networking with people where you're in the town or city where you're going to transition to, reach out to people like Bill or, other established professionals who got out. Once you're a veteran, rank is not a thing anymore. You can absolutely reach out to a CEO or a retired colonel, retired general, sergeant major, and you need to not be afraid to do that. This is not a promotional podcast, but places like Seven Eagle and other places like that, where you can set up a profile for employers to find you, and it costs you nothing. And you can say no at the end of the day, but you will have options. And I think having those options is vital to a healthy transition, because you need to get back to work eventually once you get out.
Yeah, those are all great points, and I think those are some of the things that most service members would learn about in these transition programs that the service have set up. And it goes back to what I was saying about don't wait till the day you get out to start planning for your next next life here, and so yeah, very important to think ahead and utilize those various benefits that are available to you.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of top it off here, round it out, talking about the security industry, because it's something I'm familiar with, and I know you are. However, I came from an infantry background, and I think there are quite a few military occupational specialties that feed into the security field because it's such a huge umbrella of different aspects of the security field. So, I recently wrote an article about this for Security Magazine, speaking about how veterans, it doesn't necessarily matter what they did in service exactly in terms of what their MOS was, but like what were their functions, what were their experiences. So you might have been an infantryman, but you were attached somehow to an MP unit, or you did base security operations, and you have these things that you might not know how to translate what that actually means, making an entry control point and being the sergeant of guard. What does that mean in civilian terms? So have you experienced anything like that where maybe you could give some tips to draw parallels and translate that language?
Yeah, well, I think that that you're spot on once again, that the vast majority of soldiers and service members of all the services, when they execute their duties, they're not necessarily always MOS specific. So as you point out, an infantryman, maybe people wouldn't perceive that to be a security function, but as they're executing their normal operations, and in some of the new operations that infantry soldiers have been required to do in recent years, like you said, security checkpoints and access control points, those are all security-related operations. And, as you said, sergeant of the guard. So you could certainly translate a lot of your non-security MOS functions into a security, role. But you have to be a little bit creative without overstating or exaggerating the function that you perform. Yeah, I think all soldiers are security guards in some way, shape, or form. So they all perform security in one way or another. Just the quantity of it might be a limitation. So I would say, when you're looking to try to translate, what a soldier did and to how that relates into security, is maybe look at some of the job descriptions of security personnel and kind of read through them, a variety of them, read through them and say, oh, I did that. I didn't do it exactly, as a security professional, but I did that, whether it was at an installation access control point, a priority protection point somewhere on the battlefield, or doing VIP escort on the battlefield, or things of that nature. Those are security functions that I think that you can glean, from those other job descriptions and then translate them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a really great point to, pull up some job postings and say, hey, what does this mean? Well, maybe I didn't deal with clients, but maybe adjacent units can be considered clients, or, top level executives was my brigade commander and I was his personal security detail NCO. There's so many parallels. So I definitely appreciate you elaborating on that, Bill. So yeah, we usually keep these conversations pretty short, and I think we've filled it with a lot of information. Is there anything that you want to finish off with or mention before we go?
Well, I think the one thing I would encourage all transitioning soldiers to do is utilize utilize the leadership they learned in the military and still become leaders, still be leaders in their next life. Give back to their communities. Maybe coach youth sports, join fraternal organizations. Sign them to be a mentor. Just utilize those leadership skills that they learned in the military to continue to be leaders. Because leadership is often lacking, and we don't want to let those leadership skills go to waste.
Absolutely. Well, that's great advice, Bill, and I appreciate it. And I know everyone was happy to have you on here today. So thanks for joining us on 7 Echo, and we'll catch up soon.
All right, thanks.